Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Moses and you are listening to the AHP Leader podcast. And this podcast is a series of 3 podcasts talking about changing the culture of conversation, and this one aimed at senior AHP leaders and managers. So I want to start by just asking the panel to introduce themselves. I'm just going to go around the screen. Julia, if I can start with you, please.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Julia Scott. I am a Chief Executive of the Royal College of Occupational Therapists. My personal background is a little bit complicated, but essentially I'm British with some Asian heritage.
Thank you, Julia. Oh, we've just flipped round. I'm going to go to Shamina next, please.
Hi, I'm Shamina Rabi. I'm a speech and language therapist. I'm also founder of Unlocking Language. We provide independent speech and language therapy in London. And by background, I am British Bangladeshi.
Thank you. Gita, coming down to you next.
Hi everyone, I'm Gita Ramthari. I'm a consultant allied health professional and clinical academic, so I lead a research group as well as a clinical team. And my heritage, I'm racialised as British Asian, but I'm actually mixed heritage of Mauritian and Irish parents.
Thank you, Gita. Naz, coming to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Naz. I work at the Homerton, which is a small London hospital. I am the lead of inpatient therapies. By background, I am Indian and now naturalized.
Thank you. Shireen.
Hi everyone, I'm Shareen. I'm a therapy radiographer by background, working in the quality and inclusion team for Nhs People Plan. I'm racialised as British Asian, and both my parents are Mauritian. Inclusion team.
Thank you, Shireen. Karen, I'm coming down to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Karen Middleton. I'm Chief Executive at the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy and I'm white British.
Thank you. Tara, coming down to you.
My name is Tara Humphrey. I am an independent project manager supporting primary care, and I'm also the host of the Business of Healthcare podcast, and I am Black British representing Nigeria.
Thank you, Tara. I'm so delighted you can join us again. Kamini.
Hi, I'm Kamini Gadhok. I'm Chief Executive at the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists. I am a speech therapist by background and I'm Indian British.
Thank you. Jo.
Hi, I'm Jo Finningham. I'm Deputy Chief Allied Health Professions Officer in NHS England and Improvement. My ethnicity is white British, and forgive me, I'm trying my best to keep my boys entertained downstairs. But if I keep looking, it's in case they are trying to pop their head in this room.
Thanks, Jo. And Steve.
So I'm Steve Tolan. I'm Chief AHP for London, NHS England, NHS Improvement, and I'm white Irish.
Thanks, Steve. So, slight disclaimer here in the fact that this is the second time that we've met. Unfortunately, the first time we met, the recording failed on us. So I'm so delighted that people have agreed to come back on and have this conversation. In the first 2 podcasts, we talked about people's lived experience, and we really acknowledge that racism is deeply ingrained in the structures of our healthcare systems, and that includes across our allied health professionals. And listening to the New Leader podcast in particularly, I would go as far to say in our undergraduate education systems as well. So as a collective group of panel members, we're using my newfound friendship and strength to invite senior allied health professional leaders, probably the most senior allied health professional leaders within our organisations, to come together to talk about whose role is what and whose responsibility is what, because I think there's sometimes some confusion about what should we be doing, what needs to be done, and whose responsibility is it. There's been a great deal of discussions behind the closed virtual doors, some information in written statements, and some discussions on social media. But this is really about giving people the opportunity to speak and share with us what's going on behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, and what the plans are. So I'm going to come to Jo first. So Jo, do you want to tell us what's going on within NHS England, NHSI, and what your role as the AHP senior leadership team is?
Thanks, Rachel. So I guess I'll start off with, what is NHS England and NHS Improvement responsible for, what we're accountable for, and of course as a public sector body, we have a legal duty, a statutory responsibility in terms of the Equality Act. And I guess the way that we take accountability for that and hold providers to account and commissioners is through the workforce race equality standards. And if you look on the NHS England website, you'll see all the work that the RES team have done over the last number of years, which has been a phenomenal piece of work. But still, in their 2019 publication, it still indicates that we've got such a long way to go. And currently we've got two major policies: the NHS long-term plan, but more recently published last week is the NHS People Plan, which recognises where we are at currently, in that we've not always got this right in the past, and we've got to do much better. And particularly the NHS People Promise tells us about what we should expect from our leaders in the NHS, and what we also should expect from each other in terms of compassionate and inclusive leadership, and fostering a real culture of inclusion and belonging. So I guess that's the policy piece and the document piece. But of course, this is about human beings. This is about, not just what I call the process, but the people, the hearts and minds, and how do we change that? And so I guess coming down to the AHP team in England, led by our Chief Allied Health Professions Officer, Suzanne Rastritt, we've been working on equality, inclusion and diversity for probably 24 months plus now. Thomas Keeney, my colleague, was working on this, and what we have been doing up until now is really looking at the data and getting the data right, so that we understand our current position with regards to equality, diversity and inclusion. And that it sounds like it should be a really simple piece of work, but actually it's been really difficult, looking at the workforce and looking at what our gaps are in terms of our ethnicity data and wider diversity data. So we've got some really good data now, but of course, data isn't going to change hearts and minds. It lifts a mirror up as to where we are at this moment in time. So again, we recognise in the AHP team that we've not always got this right in the past, or that we need to move at quicker pace and scale in terms of moving towards action. So I've taken over responsibility of that portfolio, of course, with Suzanne as the SRO and Stuart Palmer in our team leading on it operationally. And what we've been doing over the last month is using that data that's already been collected and looking at how do we move into action, and what are the things that we need to do. And of course, this is such a big piece of work because institutional racism exists. And so there is action to be taken probably in every nook and cranny of the system that we look at. So we've taken a kind of whole pathway approach at looking at this. So right from school leavers, and how do we attract people from Black, Asian minority and ethnicity populations to AHP courses. What's the criteria for people coming on those courses? How are people accepted? How are people supported on those courses? That bridging the gap between being a student and coming into the workplace. What are the issues there, and therefore what are the interventions that we need to take to put into action? And then of course it's the current workforce, and what things do we need to do to make sure that people of Black, Asian minority and ethnic backgrounds have the same experience as their white colleagues. And we know we've got a lot of work to do there. I'd mentioned the NHS People Plan. That was also mentioned in Simon Stevens' recent phase 3 letter, and with a real commitment to hold provider boards accountable to put together a 5-year plan, that in the next 5 years, how they would move to ensure that their senior boards and their workforce makes up the diversity of the people and populations they serve, and or the workforce, whichever be the higher percentage. So again, as an AHP team, as part of the wider pathway piece of work, that's some of the work that we need to do. But we don't want to write this action plan in a darkened room. And we've been doing already lots and lots of engagement across the arm's length bodies, because there'll be some work that we need to be doing, there'll be work that Health Education England need to be doing, and also we've been really working very collaboratively with professional bodies over the last month, and we had a round table with the professional bodies. But just finally, before I stop, because there's quite a lot to say and I recognise the time, is that we are going to, Suzanne is going to put an ask out and an invite out to form a BAME AHP Strategic Advisory Group, because this is the group that we would really like to help inform that wider strategic piece and come up with the interventions and actions that we need to move at pace and scale with. And that group will be formed of representatives from the professional bodies. So we're going to ask invites from each of the professional bodies. There'll be invites from each of the 7 regions, and then there'll be an open recruitment for 10 representatives on that group via an open recruitment. So please look out for that. We are really listening and are wanting to hear both what the challenges are, but then come up with the solutions together.
Thanks, Jo. That's really helpful. And you made a good point about the professional organisations all working together under Suzanne. And we do have, very grateful to have 3 represented here, but there's lots of work going on nationally with each of the organisations. So just wanted to make that point. So that brings us on to Steve. Jo mentioned about regional responsibility, Steve. So you're joining us from the London region, and I know you have very close links with HE as well. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what's going on in your patch? Yeah.
Sorry. So as a bit of context, Jo mentioned about the data that national team were able to pull together. So from a London perspective, 22% of AHPs in London are BAME, but that's versus a population of 45%. But what we have seen from the data that the national team have provided us is that as you move in excess of 8A, that percentage drops to less than 18%. So it shows a real challenge for us within London. So we've been looking at diversity and inclusion in London. Really, we had a burning platform last year. So obviously in London, we had a violence epidemic, and we're looking to learn lessons from the approach that London have been taking to address that. So one of the starting points is under the work we're doing around recruitment and retention of AHPs under capital AHP, we've been looking at the opportunities where recruitment to AHP careers could be a health intervention under social determinants of health. And what we were looking at is how could we target different parts of the population to come into AHP careers. So that's something that's been progressing, and as we move into this year, there's increased discussion in London around something called anchor organisations. So that's where we have NHS trusts within London acting as an anchor within the regions as we go into economic troubles, both in terms of employment opportunities and things like local procurement, but really looking at that as a vehicle to recruit Londoners, to treat Londoners, and the diversity that comes alongside that. So that's a bit more in terms of the longer term profile of the profession from a London perspective. More recently, we've been working with the chiefs of the NHS trusts in London, looking to understand and engage in their perspectives on diversity and inclusion in London. So very many of the trusts have been undertaking local activity, and what we felt was really important, myself and Laura Ledsford at Health Education England, who I work closely with on this, is understanding what the role of London is in this. So what can only London do, and what may be better done at a trust level. And the reason why that's important is for very many people, what they're trying to do is to have what they're seeking is a better direct work relationships within the employed context. So what we've been doing is working alongside them, and we're putting together a support offer for the chief AHPs to support the leaders who'll be needing to support and implement this locally. And then finally, just to say, tomorrow actually we're convening a group of BAME AHPs in London. Many of them have been on the podcast. We're just pulling together that group really for a bit of a blank sheet of paper action planning session. So thinking about what can we just do and get on with, What do we need to know to understand and inform, whether it's the work that the national team are doing, or whether that's London's strategic work, so there's development of a London equality, diversity and inclusion strategy, and being able to inform that, and also where we will be working and potential funding for work around this will come in a multidisciplinary way, really understanding what are the AHP specific needs that we need to feed into the London regional work. So I would characterise this as being at the beginning of the beginning. We've got a long way to go, but we've got various things going on to try and understand the actions that we need to take.
Thanks, Steve. That's really helpful. So I'm going to come now to the professional organisations, and if we can start with Kamini, please.
Thank you very much, Rachel. So like the other professional associations, we are member-led. We have a governance structure. Some of us have a board of trustees, others might be called councils, but they fulfil the same function, which is holding the staff to account for delivery against a strategic plan, which is informed by members, and member engagement often happens through different ways. And again, that will differ. But in essence, we have similar roles, I guess, in providing professional guidance on best practice, on supporting members to use the evidence of what works in terms of delivering care, offering CPD opportunities, and also establishing networks, communities of practice, so members can actually share and work together. We also work very hard to influence into the system, which is why we work very closely with government departments to look at policy which may affect and impact on our service users. Often our voices are more invisible, particularly for us, obviously, with people with communication needs. So it's really important that we highlight the unique role of speech therapists. The main difference that we have from other members who are on this panel, and they can talk about this a little bit more, is that the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists is not a union, so we do not have a union function. So turning now to the matter that we're talking about, we recognise, and we've apologised for the fact that we were late in our statement, in our response to Black Lives Matter. And we actually want to thank our members for holding our feet to the fire and for holding us to account and getting us to take action in a very open way on the issues that we've been talking about already. I think, as people have said, that we've highlighted, what's been highlighted is the importance of taking a more systematic and systemic and structural approach to this, as we know that racism is there in institutions and in the way that we all behave. So it's really important that we understand that we can't tackle this as a single individual or a single organisation. So working together becomes really, really important. And whilst over the years the RCSLT has worked with government to try and improve diversity within the profession, let's face it, we're still very much largely white, middle class, female. So whatever we've done so far hasn't worked. And I think it's a really important time to step back and find out why and really tackle that in a more systematic way. Also, we've all got lots of guidance on best practice. We produce guidance for members on how to meet the needs of diverse communities, and yet we're not seeing that translated into practice in a systematic way. So again, points for action, which I'll come on to. At the end of June, I actually met with over 40 members through Zoom, of course, to hear from them what some of the issues are. And to be honest, I was actually really, really shocked to hear about the level of racism that members are experiencing. And it was a bit beyond me that this is actually acceptable or happening without challenge. So I think it's really good that we're having these open conversations. It's really good that we're not what I would call skirting around the issues anymore, that we're being honest and open. And it's really important that in terms of being anti-racist, that we can actually call out behaviours, whether that's about things that are unacceptable with what somebody might say to another individual, or in the way that we deliver our services to our populations. So in terms of immediate actions, what have we done? Well, we've set up an anti-racism reference group and an online platform, a forum for all our members, because this is about everybody working together, as we've said. We need to have everybody working and supporting each other to look at how we need to change. But they will help to guide our work and inform our work, as well as us reporting to them on progress that's being made against the actions that have been agreed. We're also setting up a network. Our BAME members have asked for a network to be set up, but they want us to talk to them about what the purpose of that would be and how we would manage it. So that's something that we're talking to them about. We're also having conversations with Unite, who is the union for the speech therapy profession, about how they could get involved. So we're doing more in terms of visibility as well across our communication channels. We're very aware that we've been not very good at showing visibility of BAME members within our communication channels, whether that's through our monthly magazine or through social media, and that's something that we are tackling and will continue to do so. But as everybody's saying, that is just the beginning. So we've identified so far 3 key areas. One is supporting our members to be actively anti-racist. Now, we know that there are going to be entrenched behaviours and ways of working, and some of them might be very unconscious. People might have what we would call unconscious biases. So how do we respond to that, and how do we support our members to make the changes that we would all like to see? And it's something that we need to think about in a systematic way. So whilst we've already pointed members to reference material and reading materials, we know that that won't be enough, that we need to think about more education that is going to be required to really make that change happen. We also want to work on developing a diverse workforce, and Joanne mentioned what we might need to do. And again, we're very keen to work with all sector leaders on this, to reach out and identify from communities themselves what the barriers are to entry into the profession, and not make the assumptions of what those could be. I'm really pleased that Joanne's talked about other issues around students and what's happening. So looking at value-based recruitment by universities, and obviously the student experience. And where do we come in? We have guidance for placement educators. So obviously we can review and strengthen that, and we're already doing that at the moment. We're also working on thinking about what we can do to support with mentoring opportunities for career development, and obviously bringing together our white allies as far as we can in providing these opportunities through diversity. In terms of service delivery, that's the other side of the coin, as I would see it. It's really what's thinking about what universities teach. So how are we teaching our students about the diversity of the populations they serve? What do we tell them about the importance of looking at culture, language and religion, but also for us, obviously, the linguistics and the phonetics of languages that are not English, because that's critical if you're working as a speech and language therapist. It's really important that we identify what the gaps are in the information we've already got in terms of research or in the quality of the sort of guidance that we have, but also why is it that people are finding it hard to implement it? You know, what are the barriers to implementation? We need to understand some of those challenges so that we can identify how to address them. Is it that they don't have access to interpreters when required, for example? But again, we can't achieve any of this on our own. We can't achieve creating this change we need to see. And that's why I was really pleased to see the letter that went out that Joanne mentioned on Friday, which highlights the importance of accountability at a board level in every trust, for looking at both the workforce and the diversity in the workforce at every level, but also looking at the population we serve and the meeting the needs of our populations and addressing health inequalities. On the HR and OD front, it's great to see that discrimination is not going to be tolerated, but it would be good to see if NHS England would actually say more and have a programme around being actively anti-racist, because I think that's what Black Lives Matter has really highlighted, the need for that to be taken on board and for those sorts of conversations and actions to take place.
Thank you, Kamini. That was great. Thank you. I'm going to move to Karen next, please.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. So I am in danger of saying everything that Kamini said plus. So I think that the things that I would highlight, we at the CSP, we're a professional body and a trade union, which is different from the RCSLT, which means that not only have we got responsibilities around the education and practice of our members, but also their working lives and social justice. And quite clearly, the issue of equality, diversity and inclusion could sit solely within the trade union function of the CSP. And I think one of the issues that I've reflected on over the last few months is actually that is where it has sat, and that in fact the rest of the organisation has been in danger of being complacent, when actually equality, diversity and inclusion has to be a feature of all of our work. So in terms of our work to date, people will know that I too issued an apology about our reaction time to the issue of Black Lives Matter. But also it was an apology around the fact that whatever we have been doing, and we have, for example, had a BAME network of members for 25 years this year. It celebrates its 25 years. But for whatever reason, we have not had the impact that's required. We haven't seen the change that that the system that our members deserve and should have seen. So we're doing a lot of reflection on what we need to do differently, and I think that that's the key. It's about what do we need to do differently. We've got, I mean, before the last recording of this, I sort of quickly jotted down all the things that we've been doing in the last few months, and there's sort of 23 things that I could sort of just rattle off, which I'm not going to do, because I think what I want to be clear about is that we are trying to take a thoughtful approach to this, in that we have decided at the moment that there needs to be an equality, diversity and inclusion strategy that supports the corporate strategy. We are identifying and pulling out the work that is in train already, that is just not visible in terms of its impact on equality, diversity and inclusion. And that strategy will have an internal internal staff focus and an external member focus. And these two things are really clear, because as an organisation, we are both an employer as well as a trade union and a professional body to support our members. And I'm quite clear that as an employer, which is where actually I have the greatest control, if you like, is that we need to be exemplary too. And in the listening work that I've been doing with staff and members, I have been absolutely horrified by what I've heard. And I think, speaking to something that Joe said, I think we all recognise and would be the first to stand up and say really extreme, explicit racism is relatively easy to spot and to call out. But actually what I've heard and I have found the most disturbing is what is described as microaggressions, which somehow for me feels uncomfortable because micro somehow diminishes it. But actually that has been the most painful to hear about, both from my staff and members. So, you know, I'm leading an organisation where my staff are experiencing this, as well as running an organisation that supports 59,000 members, many of whom have experienced racism and these microaggressions at work. So the strategy in terms of the members that we have been working with is looking at 4 areas in particular: getting more BAME representation into the profession. And obviously our work there is with the HEIs and careers and schools, etc. Improving the experience of BAME staff members in their working lives, which is where it sits very much with the trade union function. I mean, the People Plan last week talked about the disciplinary gap, for example. I mean, those figures were pretty shocking alone. So there is something that we need to just think very differently about how we deal with the experience of our members in their working lives. And, you know, in response to my apology to members that went on the website, I was absolutely horrified by some of the comments that came back from physiotherapists, our members, that were racist, and it, you know, had to be called out. And of course, they were there anonymously. So we know that in the profession we have an issue, never mind in the workplace, that members are having to face. So there's something about the experience of our members in their working lives. The third area is seeing more BAME representation in senior leadership positions. And we already have a CSP leadership development program. And one of the pieces of work that I particularly want to see, because leadership is where I'm particularly interested, is more positive action being taken around the people that go through that leadership program. And then the last area of work is around what Kamini was referring to, the governance of the CSP. Whilst there is some invisible diversity of council, there is no BAME representation at council. And we had a review a couple of years ago. One of the principles was that we wanted to see more diversity at council and the committees. To some extent that's been successful with the 3 committees, but not so with council, although we were advised that if you reduce the size of council, you're very unlikely to increase the diversity. So council has been focusing its attention on this year's elections. Unfortunately, they were cancelled because of COVID. But what we are aware of is that there were 5 BAME members who were looking to stand for council. But standing for council, of course, is one thing. They then need to get elected by the very membership. And I've just described some of the examples of where some of our members are at. So again, there's something about how we take positive action to support the organising, perhaps through the BAME network of members, to have a better chance that the membership elect a more diverse council going forward. I suppose the last thing I would just go back to is referring to our strategy and the fact that it does have internal focus as well. So we will be conducting an audit on our policies and procedures and processes internally. I'm very conscious that, never mind commenting on the leadership within the NHS, for example, the leadership of the CSP is all white. And so if we want to support our diverse members, we need to be a more diverse organisation too. So that's why I want the strategy to have two components, if you like. And as I say, after all, I do have more control over what happens in terms of the employees. And then just one smaller point, I think that well, it's not small, but it's a last point, is that we are very, very conscious that in focusing on the BAME network, for example, and our BAME members, we need to be very careful not to consider that group as a homogenous group. There is lots of difference within that group and lots of different issues that they are facing, but also the intersectionality with other groups. So with our other 2 diversity networks, you know, there is also some issues that cross the groups. So it's complex, but it is something that I am accountable for. All the strategic aims in the CSP, each director has accountability for. I have accountability for this EDI strategy, and council will hold me to account for developing it and working it up. And of course, it's the membership that hold council to account. So we're signalling very clearly the level of priority that this work takes in the CSP, and our focus is that it will be sustainable and it will be fully funded. And I think the problem for members, and I really understand this, is you know, where's the action? you know, because I said right at the beginning in my apology about what we had and hadn't done was that we can all say very laudable things, but actually it's got to be turned into action. And there's something about how long this must feel like it's taking to get off the ground. So we need to think about how we keep communicating what we're actually doing at the moment.
Thank you, Karen. Now I'm coming to Julia, who's drew this short straw slightly by going after both Karen and Kamini. But I just want to reassure people that, you know, there is collaboration between the professional networks. The chief execs do speak to each other and they do collaborate about things. So there is genuinely lots of common themes that are happening within the organisations now, and that was certainly reassuring for me to find out, you know, as part of the research for doing these podcasts. So Julia, come to you.
Thank you, Rachel. And indeed, my colleagues have already said some of the things I was going to say, so I will save time by not repeating them. We actually, after our big conversation we had at the beginning of July with members from the BAME community, we published our actions that we've taken since that big conversation on Friday. So they are on our website. I won't go through them in detail, but they're there, and I can talk to them, but it will take more time that perhaps other people can go and have a look at. I think one of the things I feel as professional bodies we've got to be clear about is what is in our locus of control and what isn't. And I think that would help members as well, because I think members do want to see action. Karen's quite right, but they may be looking in all sorts of places looking for action. So we need to own what is in our control, and certainly we need to showcase good practice when we've seen it. And we've taken very quick action. I did show this on the failed recording, but I'm going to show it again, which is our recent edition of OT News, where we've had a number of members talk about from the BAME communities, talking about their own experiences, and that was something we've done very quickly. I think the difficulty with professional bodies is sometimes things don't happen very quickly. We are democratic, we are accountable, and I recognise the frustration that will cause with some of our members or AHPs in the wider community, but we need to do it right, and we need to do it sustainably for the very long term. We believe that we need to raise awareness within our members. We do think a lot of our members are not even switched on to the issues of equality, diversity, inclusion, and we want to make it everyone's business. And we're doing that by working with some of our regions and our members, other networks, just to talk about it quite a lot more. And we do believe in positive action and in reaching out to people. And we've already, for the first time, placed a first job on a diversity website. That's fine to do that. Some people are confused and not sure how much action you can take, but we have done that. We're also doing work on our own unconscious bias. As Karen said, as an employer, we have to think of how we work internally. And we really want to push the culture reset button within the Royal College. We actually want to do something really quite fundamental and recognise, I think, the value of equality and inclusion as transformative processes. They are transformative for good processes. So we must embrace them and bring them to our hearts. We want to focus our efforts, just as the other colleagues have said. We have been a bit diffuse. There's been stuff going on, but it's been a bit hidden and a bit diffuse. We will therefore be taking a strategy to October Council, which we will seek agreement and funding for. But we also need to use our influence about what is outward of our control. As professional bodies, we're very fortunate. We can get on platforms other people can't, and we can talk to people that perhaps others can't. So I think we have to use those opportunities a bit more, and we have to speak up and call things out when they feel uncomfortable. And I really do think we have to walk the talk as an employer. So, you know, we're going to have to be anti-racist, we're going to talk about being anti-racist, and we're going to have to examine our own process as an employer. As I say, I think members have been in touch with us. They want to know what they can do at a personal level, but they also want to know what their organisation should be doing. And then they want to know what they can expect our COT to be doing as well. So there's 3 levels, and we need to make that all much clearer to our members. Just in closing, I would say, I don't think there'll be many changes overnight. We have done a few quick wins, but those are the quick wins. A lot of these things will take much longer to deliver. But we are very grateful, as Kamini said, to those members who've already talked to us about it, told us what they want to see. are asking us the challenging questions, because they provide the impetus and keep that. I like the idea of feet to the flame, although it sounds rather uncomfortable. I might need a podiatrist, but I kind of think that is what they're doing, and that's no bad thing. So I'm going to stop there rather than repeat some of the other stuff.
Thank you so much, Julia. And yeah, I completely agree. There's some natural leaders and role models coming through in this, and we've been very fortunate to have some join us on other podcasts as well. So Tara, I'm coming to you next. Now, as I said before, I'm slightly obsessed with you at the moment. There's nothing that you can't do. So you founded your own company, Healthcare Leadership Company. You have wrote over 150 blogs. I haven't got quite through them all yet. And you have a successful podcast as well. And for those that don't follow Tara on Twitter, I suggest you follow her. Our Twitter handle will be on the bio underneath the video link. So the reason for inviting you, Tara, was really to just give us a flavour of what else is out there. Sometimes as healthcare professionals, we can be very introverted within my professional silos, but also within my organisations or professional bodies. But you do so much for healthcare leaders. So can you just tell us a little bit about like what you do and what opportunities are out there?
Well, thank you very much. I was thinking if I could blush, I would. So what opportunities are out there? So on the podcast and in this discussion, most everyone in one shape or another has said about action and taking practical steps, but obviously not rushing it, and it has to be thoughtful and considered. And I did think, what can I do? Because I had a conversation with my sister, and yes, I am a minority, but I do feel like I am in a position to influence others. I am an employer, although it's a very small company. I am an employer, and I do have some of the same recruitment challenges as everybody else does. So I have been looking at my own equality and diversity and how we recruit. And I also thought, I'm a big believer in, whilst it's very hard to change the views of other people, but we are individually able to change the view and perception of ourselves and equip ourselves and educate ourselves and get coaching. So I did think, I'm a big fan of that. I invest in it. And I'm in a position to be able to help other people to do the same. So when you ask me what else is out there, currently we are facilitating and funding our own educational scholarship for BME leaders looking to pursue or progress their career. They just have to work in the field of healthcare and be employed. But somebody mentioned sustainability. So I have been working with my accountant, and this is hopefully the first of many rounds, and it's also given me a bit more drive and purpose to make money to be able to support initiatives like this moving forward. So there are lots of scholarships. Mine, I've just taken the idea from hundreds and hundreds of organisations that they do have scholarships out there. And one of the things I wanted to say on this platform is, we have to put ourselves forward. So you can have strategies out there and people can recruit you, but you have to put yourselves forward. And one of the reasons why we've extended the deadline is not many people have put themselves forward. And when they phone me up, I'm encouraging them, saying, you can do it, you can do it. The application form, it's not Harvard, it's quite a small application form. So there is something around confidence, and that's why we're also offering mentorship as well, mentorship and coaching. And then the other thing that's kind of the other thing I wanted to say is around, it's all our responsibilities. And even though I am a private organisation, I can put myself forward. I can write a blog, I can record a podcast, I can go on social media, I can speak up at a meeting. Don't get me wrong, it can be very daunting and very scary when nobody looks like you, or you feel like, should I do this or shouldn't I do it? But I hopefully can encourage, and I'm trying to lead by example, but I come across as very confident, but I am nervous. I am very nervous to do things like this, but I think it's my responsibility to lead by example and also share. You don't have to be the most confident person to do it. You just have to try. So there are opportunities out there. Sometimes you've got to be quick and off the mark. And sometimes it takes a while to build your application, but once you've done it once, now you've got your template for the next opportunity. And one of the things I have done in my career is say, my first mentor, I approached my mentor and said, will you mentor me 6 sessions, 45 minutes, I'll be 10 minutes early. And I led that. And he said, no one's ever asked me to be a mentor before. So I think my message is, it's absolutely fantastic that I'm working with organisations, I'm in the primary care space, that are building these strategies. On the other end, on the other side, we need to put ourselves forward.
Thank you, Tara. You're getting a little round of applause there. So Tara is so kind and generous, putting £2,000 non-returnable grants to anyone. So AHPs can apply. There'll be a link in this bio. Please put yourself forward. And if you want any help, just reach out to us here on the panel and to Tara herself. So Tara, some of the stuff you just said is really powerful there for some of our AHP private practitioners and those small business owners, and some actually really quite large business owners as well. So really looking from within in terms of how they really project that inclusive workforce culture, and if you do and if not. Now, I just want to bring up some key points from those discussions from everyone, and then come round to our original panel as well to ask any questions. So the reason why we had 3 levels of podcasts, so we had the new leaders, emerging leaders and senior leaders, was because when I was doing research for the podcast idea, when it was an idea at the time, as a white AHP leader, I can tell you that leaders, not only in very senior positions, but even those in those emerging roles, didn't know how to start conversations. They didn't know how to reach out to Black, Asian, minority ethnic AHP staff and say, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How is this affecting you? And then when I did reach out to staff, they were telling me about their experiences of indirect and direct racism within our organisations. So it is very much real and it's very much out there. One of the things we've learned over the previous 2 podcasts is about how people can reach out and how people can be supported, and that it is everyone's responsibility. So everything you've just reinforced there. And I think it's really reassuring to hear that the organisations are, collaborating with each other. Like Karen mentioned, all the AHP CEOs are meeting tomorrow to discuss their strategies and plans and how they can do things collectively. Joe's taught us about what's going on about at NHSE level, and Steve within the regions. So I want to come to my panel, and Tara included as well. And is there anything that anyone wants to pick up moving forward, or anything that we've kind of discussed that people want to elaborate on? Or shall I bring Gita? Can I come to you?
Thanks, Rachel. Yes, it was a question I had for probably more for the CEOs, thinking about governance within the different organisations. I know there's slightly different roles there, but and Karen, you talked about the fact there's been a BAME network for 25 years, and I know in other networks there are new emerging BAME networks being set up. But as you reflected, Karen, that although that body has been there for many years, that there's still shortcomings within the membership. So actually, is this time for us, reflecting back on existing BAME networks or new emerging BAME networks, to be thinking about what actually is the role of those, not just the BAME network, but LGBTQIA plus networks, disability networks? What is the role of those networks in governance of the organisations?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Gita, and actually one that's been asked in terms of how accessible the networks are as well. So certainly even at the very beginning, when I was looking for people for the podcast, it was really hard to engage a population of people I didn't know where they sat. So Karen, can we come to you?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and it's something that we have certainly been reviewing because, well, for all the reasons that I've said and Gita's said. I think the problem with the governance, so let's just sticking with the governing body, council, it has to be elected. For us in the CSP, partly because of our Royal Charter, but also trade union legislation. So there is absolutely nothing we can do about the fact that our council has to be elected by the membership, and only members can be on council. So what we have to do, and that's why council has sort of been doing the work it's been doing with members of the BAME network and others, to try and do anything and everything to give us the best chance of more diversity at the elections. But that alone can't be it, because obviously we've also got the membership that we need to see the value of a diverse council. And so there's a whole education piece there to be done. And the other thing that I've been discussing with the chair of council at the CSP is organising and understanding that as a nominee or somebody who's being nominated for council, how they organise in order to get the most votes. I mean, that's the bottom line. There's something else, though, that we are looking at, which is if, for example, council are discussing any issues where they want particular expertise, we need to make sure that they co-opt or they bring in that expertise. And I think it's very obvious when it's something, I don't know, clinical, for example. What I'm more interested in is whether we identify specific issues where, right, we need someone from the BAME network. In a way, that's much easier. What isn't really very clear, and why we need to think more creatively about how we get the BAME and other minority voices in all of council's work, is because you don't know what you don't know. So it could be that council are discussing, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but they might be discussing something that would appear not to have any sort of relevance, particularly for the BAME membership, but actually there is. You know, who knew when COVID first started, for example, that it would have such a disproportionate impact on BAME staff and also in society at large. So what we're trying to work through is, given the legislation, given the Royal Charter, given we're waiting on elections to see us have a more diverse council, what else could we do to get that voice into the work of the governance of the CSP?
Thanks, Karen. Coming down to Julia.
Thank you, Gita, because I think that really is an important question. And I have good news, because a member of who joined us for the big conversation was already actually standing for our council and has been elected. So that's great news. Now, what's interesting is that he is very clear that he doesn't want to have been selected simply because of how he looks, as he says it. He wants to be a council member, but he happens to be part of that group. So that, I can't exploit it, but I might just talk to him quite a bit and get some more ideas. One of the other thoughts we've had, and I'd be just interested in some nods or some don't go theres from the panel really, is that when we do standard adverts for council members, because like Karen says, it's all controlled by trades union law, so we have to follow these certain routes. But one of the things we thought about was offering an informal info session to, we could do it just to BAME members, or we could do it to all members, because it's usually just a letter from me saying, would you like to stand, and here's the job description or the role description, and if you want to do it, you've got to fill in this form by this date. But what about, I mean, I'm quite keen on the reaching out process now. I realize I need to reach out. Would that be a good thing to say to members? There's going to be a session on Friday at 3 o'clock if you want to just come drop in for a cup of coffee and talk about it. And would it be a good thing to say it specifically for BAME members in this instance? But I recognize, just as everyone else said, diversity is about more than BAME groups, but we're talking about BAME. So I'd really appreciate a view from the group.
Just one thought, and there's something I read about the other day, because of course there's there's a fine balance between tokenism and positive discrimination and positive action. But a really good strategy I heard about, and this was to do with recruitment within the workplace, was actually saying that there was a specific focus on people with diversity experience. And what that did, I think, was then open up the people who then applied. Actually the applicants were much more diverse, because that said, that was the specific focus, was people with diversity experience or an interest or have worked in that area, just as a possible thought.
Thank you.
Thanks. Shareen, I'm going to come to you before coming down to Kamini, because I think your point's related to this.
Yeah, so just to touch on what Julia was saying, I think I'm very much a big fan of the reaching out, and a big fan of actually calling what it is you want to call it. So if you're reaching out specifically to DQI individuals, I'm 100% behind that, because I think more often than not we've been cautious, and because we don't know, because we're unsure, and that's probably hindered any kind of progress that we actually should be making. Now, with everything that's been going on with the disparities in COVID, we knew that that those from a non-white British and also with the Black Lives Matter, there was a lot within that we could have probably anticipated, and now is the time for us to be bolder and to move forward with what it is that we're actually trying to achieve. Racism, discrimination, for me and what I see, is often still focused on those who are BME, LGBTQ, disabled, and actually we need to start coming at it any kind of progress that we actually show, but actually using the voices of those that are other to be able to tell those stories.
Thanks, Shareen. Yeah, internet was a bit dodgy there, but I'm hoping that one of the audio files would have picked it up a bit better than we could hear there. So, Naz, I'm going to come to you before, because sorry, Kamini, I know you're trying to get in here. If it's on the same point, then we'll come down to Kamini.
It is actually. So I wondered what co-production has to offer to some of this, because it sounds to me that's what we're talking about. This is about, from the inception, having someone, rather than kind of, having these meetings in a room and then asking BAME voices, whether we think about the elements of co-production and whether truly co-produce some of this stuff.
Agreed. Yeah, definitely. Kamini, coming down to you, please.
Yeah, so in fact, that's what I mentioned earlier, that in terms of the BAME network, which I think was Gita was asking, the members we've spoken to are worried about setting something up. And actually, one of them said, we don't want it to be a space where people just rant, is what her words were. What will happen? What's the purpose? So we really want to co-produce and understand, which is also why we want to work with the union, because if there are issues that come up which are to do with racism in the workplace, then something needs to happen. Who supports that? Is that the union that gets involved? So I think it's really important that we do co-produce and not, again, set something up that's in a tokenistic network that doesn't have any voice or doesn't enable or empower our members. I think that would be the wrong thing to do. We're also working with the we're going to bring somebody in to have a look at the governance issues and how do we approach looking at diversity on the board, and what is the best, I suppose, is there good practice that we can learn from that might be outside of our own spaces? So that's something that we really need to think about. We're also working to co-produce in terms of thinking going forward. I think I was hearing, or maybe I didn't hear, about the importance of actually what I would call flipping the conversation, because racism is something that's experienced by our BAME colleagues, but we need our white allies to come on board to say, okay, so what's the behaviour that needs to change? So we've got members of the Board of Trustees and members from the BAME community working together to plan a town hall event, which will be open for the whole profession to really, again, co-produce ways forward rather than us making assumptions about what we need to do. So I think what I'm saying is I don't actually have a solution to some of the questions that Gita's asked. And also I know some of our colleagues from BAME communities are quite nervous that we don't go down and find that actually that was the wrong thing to do, that we do co-produce with them. So I hope that helps in responding to some of those questions.
Yeah, thank you, definitely. Now, one thing I want to, I'm conscious of time, and one thing I do want to talk about a little bit is our role as senior AHP leaders. And I have a critical friend, and he got in touch with me yesterday and had two criticisms. One about the use of BAME, and he asked me when I put a call out for things to start saying non-white. And I said, oh, that's really interesting, because when I'd had conversations about like the podcast, people within the podcast thought BAME was the right terminology to use because it was the most recognised reference. So that was one point. The second point was about my pale panel on some of the other podcasts, which I had recognised and felt quite anxious about. I actually messaged Gita over the weekend as well once I was putting them out there. But the reality was, even when I specifically reached out to BAME non-white AHP colleagues that are friends of mine and colleagues, they just didn't have the confidence to speak on some of the podcasts related about COVID, about clinical experience, and even though it was their lived experience. And when when I questioned further, without wanting to put pressure on people who were quite clearly not comfortable to do it, was about the fear of getting things wrong, about the fear of being judged. Some have been in Band 7 roles for many years. We've talked about these on the other podcasts and seen their white counterparts leapfrog them into senior positions, and they felt that if they said the wrong thing, they'd be judged. That for me was just heartbreaking, number one. But number two, I had a dilemma about whether to go ahead with them or not. They were educational. And I think the big thing for me moving forward is how can I use even more networks than we've been trying to engage. So as AHP leaders, if you've got non-white staff members within your department and you notice that their career hasn't progressed, or have you reached out and asked about what specific challenges they may have, this is the time to do it. And I don't think that chief AHPs, senior AHPs are doing that. I might be wrong, but I don't think they are. And some actually admitted to me before the podcast that they weren't. So what are people's thoughts on that? I know I can see, Shareen, you've got your hand up, and I know you're going to try and turn your video off. Shareen, we'll come to you.
Sorry, I was having internet issues. I'm hoping this is better. So I think really good point, Rachel. I will say, so for me, I've been dark-skinned Asian for nearly 40 years, and it's only the last 2 years that I've started to speak out about some of the experiences that I've had. And I think that's the problem. People aren't confident, people are fearful. I think it is, from my perspective, it is the responsibility of those that look like me to bring those others that look like me along. And it is the responsibility of white colleagues like yourself to create the safe spaces, because of the fear that there is in, if people see me talk about racism that I've experienced, and you know from the previous podcast I've shared some real deep and dark and quite painful truths about some of my experiences, and I'm okay with that now. When those experiences were happening, I said nothing, I did nothing, I sat back and I accepted it. And it is something around confidence building, and those of us like myself to be able to bring those others along with me and say to them that actually it's okay if you speak up. Something I've been reflecting a lot today and had a lot of these conversations, and there is part of recognizing systemic racism is also to recognize that those that are experiencing it do not recognize it themselves, and actually that is where those of us that can see it, we need to be the ones calling it out. Speaking up isn't just about the victim speaking up, it's about calling it out if you see it happening to others.
Thank you, Shareen, that was perfect audio. Thank you. Gita, coming to you then. Shamina.
Just your point, the first point you made about the term BAME, there's been a few articles about this recently, and it's something we've been discussing in the BAME network that I'm part of with the CSP as well, because it is problematic in that it lumps together people from so many different backgrounds, from different religions, different parts of the world, different cultures, and so everybody's experience from different groups will be different. And I think Black Lives Matter really proved that Black Lives Matter is about the Black experience. It's not about my experience as an Asian woman. It is about what's happening to Black people living in the US and living here, even though I've experienced some racism. And I think part of the problem is that when we look at some of the data, it comes under the BAME umbrella, and and this is why we need more granular data really to really understand what's going on. So, you know, we had a look at some of the CSP census data from 2019, which showed that the breakdown of a percentage in different groups. So there are, I think in 2019 there's 5% Asian physios, 2% Black, 1% mixed, and then 86% white. So although you put that together, and that's what, you know, that's 8% BAME, but actually look at the figures for how many Black physiotherapists there are, and actually how many Black physiotherapists are we recruiting, and so actually does there need to be, you know, specific help for people from those groups that we should be looking at, not just ticking a BAME box, because I think there's a real danger of that, you know, in our workplaces, in our trusts as well, and I think we're very aware of that, and certainly in other areas outside of healthcare, people are questioning that, because I think BAME, I think it was a civil service sort of label that has kind of been adopted everywhere, and it is problematic, and there's certainly people railing against it now. But what do we use? I think terminology is always difficult, but there has to be a recognition that it's not just one box.
Shamina, coming to you then, Tara.
Yeah, I wanted to say that there's been real impact through having these podcasts, and very recently I got a couple of messages from two therapists from speech and language therapy who are BAME, and one said to me, I'm going to actually read it, that I admire all the work that you've been doing to prompt speech therapists and BAMEs in our profession, and hopefully I'll be able to do the same one day. And I've had another therapist who said, you know, I come from an Indian background, and we've always been taught to be quiet and not to really speak our minds, but watching you has inspired me to be able to talk and to be able to develop my confidence in that area. So what I wanted to say is all these you know, the podcast, the conversations that we're all having, I think the impact is happening. We might not know straight away, but when we hear it, just you know, just being able to affect the life of one therapist is huge. So I think I agree with Shareen and Gita, that, you know, people are embarrassed. But I think the conversations are allowing that space for action to take place.
Thank you, Shamina. Coming down, was it Tara next? I can't remember who's next. Tara.
I just wanted to respond to the comment about using the term BAME, and that I've used that in my scholarship, and I suppose I just wanted to say that we're going to get it wrong sometimes, and that I don't mind people using that, and I think that is attracting me to some of the opportunities. I don't mind if people call me Black. I don't really, as long as it's not really offensive, I don't really mind. And so I think that there is, until whatever term we use, that somebody may be offended by it, and I think that we just have to be brave to say that at the moment that's the term we're going to use. And I think people know when the intention behind your terminology and your language is good, and when people are being blatantly rude and offensive. So I use that, and when I first launched my scholarship, I was really nervous because I thought I was going to get loads of people saying, oh, why are you doing this and why are you doing that? And some people did, but I think if the intention is good, and when you do experience some criticism, you genuinely listen, and you know, it is changing my viewpoints when people raise things with me. But I think just because I am part of that community doesn't make me exempt from getting it wrong, but it's how we learn, and it's the price you have to pay when you put your head above the parapet.
Yeah, Naz, coming to you then, Karen.
Yep, so two thoughts. One, around BAME, I wonder if there's some resonance in BAME and AHP, because allied health professionals, 14 different professions, we are better, louder when we're together. The whole AHP interaction kind of shows that, and I wonder if that's what BAME is helpful for. It's to amplify some of those cross-cutting themes that we'll all have. But I agree completely with what the panel members have said around looking at some things more specifically. which then leads on to kind of the question that I've been kind of sat here pondering about in preparation for this. In fact, all three podcasts. I did wonder, what does good look like? Just in terms of how do we know we're getting this right? Because I truly believe this is a wicked problem. We probably won't be able to solve it. Last time we talked about this, Susan had the perfect answer about what good would look like. I.e., we wouldn't be having these conversations because we would have solved it. I am not as hopeful, probably. I will say I think we're going to nudge this in the right direction rather than solve it, but I'd be really interested to hear from kind of panel members about what their thoughts are about what good looks like.
So I'm going to bring in Jo at this point, and then anyone else that wants to come in as well.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel, and thanks for the question, because I think, you know, that moving to, you know, what's the impact we are seeking to see? You know, for me, and I think we've touched on it a little bit, but if I can just kind of tell you stark what we know from the figures. So we know that our Black, Asian, minority and ethnic colleagues are less likely to get promoted, they're more likely to get bullied, they're more likely to get disciplined, they're less likely to be appointed into senior leadership positions, and I could go on. And that is completely and utterly unacceptable. What good would look like is that that is completely eradicated. You know, we know that the NHS has been built on the principles of social justice, and that's embedded in the NHS Constitution, our NHS values, and now in the Nhs People Plan. So for me, it would be about social justice. And if I could just pick up on, I guess, what was also I'm thinking in my mind, Rachel, connected to your what should leaders be doing in chief AHPs, and that, you know, for me, it's the psychological safety is so important, isn't it, to allow these conversations to happen of some real difficult topics. Over probably the last 3 or 4 years, when I've been talking with my team and out with my team, I almost feel like I need to give an apology. So I'll say, my language might be a bit bumpy around this, and I really don't want to offend. So please do tell me if I'm saying something that you may find offensive. So I think that's, I guess, one of the tip. I don't know whether that's right or not, but it seems to work for me. And then the other thing I think as leaders is about giving something of yourself that equally may be uncomfortable. So, you know, the only experience I can relate to is with my son, who has autism and ADHD, and also describes himself, is pansexual, and some of the experiences that I've had as his mother and he's had in terms of discrimination, bullying and unequal access to education. So there's something about building a psychological safety, but also being able to offer something of yourself within that conversation. So sorry, I've answered 2 questions in one there. I hope that's okay.
No, thank you, and thank you for sharing that personal experience there, Jo. Julia, coming down to you.
Yes, I think that what does good look like is a resounding question that we have to keep asking as we go along the journey. There's something about role models and positive action. Accountability is going to be very, very important. There's no point in us taking forward these strategies with lots of actions. We must ensure there's accountability, even if it's going to take a year or 18 months to deliver. Someone has to own it over that time. I think we need the metrics, but we also need the quality. We need the how does it feel question. And we've got, as Jo says, we've got to be more confident of asking how it feels. And maybe sometimes that, I like the idea of bumpy language. I'm gonna steal that, Jo, because I think that's a good way of saying sometimes I'm gonna get it wrong. I'd like to see more calling out of poor practice, actually. I think we all could be better at that. It's not only for people from the BAME community to call it out, we should be calling it out too, showcasing good practice, and really that we do start to, as all the AHP family, reflect those people we serve, because we serve a hugely diverse population. We need to reflect that population, and we therefore make use of the wonderful diversity of talent. We have the potential to call forward in offering the best services we can to the people we're serving. So that's it from me.
Thank you so much. So I am going to bring in Steve at this point for a comment on, Kamini, did you want to speak on any of that? No problem.
Well, just very quickly to say, obviously agree with what a lot of people have said. I think it is a very complex area, but I think if we can build a culture of inclusivity and actually celebrating diversity and diversity in its fullest form. You know, we all bring so much to the table because we have different experiences. And I actually rang and spoke to my manager back in Nottingham. She was my manager many years ago, because I remember myself as what I would call quite a gobby young therapist. So interesting to hear what other people think about whether they're empowered to say what they think. I definitely felt that way, but she didn't see me as a threat. I was always very much challenging why we had to do things. If I saw that, going back to social injustice, if I saw that patients or service users were not getting the service they should have because there were barriers to access, and it was our responsibility to remove those. And she was saying to me that she really thought it was important to have diversity of thought, because actually it made a better team. So there's some really core principles, and yet we know that, but certainly we're not seeing that very empowering leadership style within our system. So how do we create the right leaders, I guess, for the future? And that would be the opportunity going forwards.
Thank you. And that just comes on so nicely to what I was going to ask Steve about, which is bringing in work across the networks with the regional responsibility of the People Plan and also Health Education England. We don't need to speak too much about education because we spoke about it so much in our Emerging Leader and our New Leaders podcast. But just a final point from you, Steve.
So a couple of quick points. So just to, first of all, to highlight Naz, who's London OT and NHS Assembly member. So the NHS Assembly is going to provide some national scrutiny and governance to the NHS performance on this. In London, we have David Sloman has asked Yvonne Coghill to pull together a equality, diversity and inclusion strategy for London, and that will be governed through the London People Board that's been established. We have AHP representation on there. Looking at the role of, I think one of the things that's really exciting, if we look at the phase 3 letter that Kamini mentioned, I think what's exciting and I think necessary is bringing together the thoughts around not just diversity in terms of the workforce, but in parallel accountability for inequalities. And for me, I'm not sure that those things can be addressed in isolation. I think they're enablers to each other, and I think if we're getting inequalities right and health inequalities, if we're addressing those appropriately, we are likely increasing and supporting the diversity of the workforce.
Thank you so much, Steve. Now, as usual, I do not want to have the last word, so I'm going looking around to my original panel members for final comments, please. Naz.
So it isn't so much a comment, more I wonder in vein of what I've said around co-production, whether at the end of the podcast it's worth kind of asking the question to anyone who's listening. We'd be really keen to hear what good would look like from this, from your perspective as well. I think we will all be richer to know. So yes, please put it either in the comments, and I'm sure Rachel will have ways of communicating with people, but I'd be really keen to hear broader than us what good looks like.
Thank you. Tara, can I come to you, please?
What was the question? Oh, you're on mute.
Any final comments?
Well, just firstly, thank you for including me, and I think you guys are leading by example. I'm not part of the AHP community, but you still reached out, and I think the fact that you pulled together so many podcasts and brought together so many people is a real testament to the work you guys are doing and what the future can look like. So I think that, yeah, you guys are doing an amazing job, and I think my final thought, just to reiterate, is if you are non-white, BME, don't know what to say, put yourself forwards, and as hard as it is, you kind of got to brush yourself up and put yourself forward again and again and again and again. And there are opportunities, and I think that yeah, just be brave, just be brave.
Be brave, and in the words of Gita, be bold. So definitely, if nobody has anything to left to say, just having a quick look around, I'll close that to an end. Thank you so much, really appreciated everyone, and thanks very much.